Hello everyone, welcome to episode 5 in the stories of Abram. We're in Genesis 15, which is going to expand the treatment of the Abrahamic covenant. Maybe you're a Hebrew student trying to stay fresh between semesters, or a recent grad who doesn't want to lose all that hard work you put in, or maybe you're trying to get back to your Hebrew after you've been away for a while and you don't want to start by just studying paradigms all the time. So this is for you. We're doing a few verses a day. We're reviewing a little bit of grammar each time, not trying to do everything all at once. And feel free to stop the video whenever you want and try and puzzle through a form before I describe it for you. All right, let's dive in. Achar ha'devarim ha'ela haya devar Adonai el Avram b'machazeh lemor. So achar, you might remember, which is similar to acharei, is a word for meaning after. Then we have hadivarim, and this is a place where davar does not refer to words. Maybe you had word, matter, thing, or something like that as the glosses you learned for davar. Followed by ha'ela. So we've got the article on the demonstrative pronoun ela after the things, these ones. So after these things, which is a common way to start a story using a time reference. Haya devar Adonai el Avram. So devar Adonai, now the word of the Lord. You can see it's in construct because that last syllable, var, is pretonic, closed short. And we've got the Shavah under the Dalet at the beginning. And so we can call that the word of the Lord or even the Lord's message. We don't always have to use word for davar. The Lord's message came to Abram b'machazeh. So a lot of letters there in machazeh. The root's all at the end, the chet, the zayin, and the hey. And the verbal root means to see. So this might not be a noun that we had learned in first year Hebrew. But when we stick a mem on the front of a verbal root, that can be a way of making a noun. Also, you can use a tav, and on rare occasions, an aleph. So sometimes we call that the ATM rule. So chazah, to see, mem, turn that into a noun, and that refers to a vision. And then we've got the preposition bet on the front, and the article, the patak and the dagesh remain from the article. So it says in the vision, and it's using the article here just to talk about that class of thing, and so English would just use a. So after these things, the Lord's message came to Abram in a vision, saying, Al tira Avram, anoki magain lak, sakaraka harbe ma'od. So you might remember in the last chapter, Abram had gone to battle in order to free his nephew Lot, and so there would be stuff to be thinking about in the aftermath and the fear and trauma and all that can go along with that. And so God comes to him in this chapter and says, do not be afraid. So when you look at Tira, you see all the root letters there, Yod, Resh, and Aleph, from Yareh, to be afraid. The Yod is turned into a vowel because it was sitting over silent Shavah. When we make the Kal imperfect, we have the first radical closing a syllable and the prefix sitting over top of a Chirik. But this is a letter that turns into a vowel, so that it becomes a Chirik Yod, and no Shavah under that Yod. The Tav prefix can be either 2ms or 3fs, but of course we're in a context and we know the Lord is talking to Abram, so second masculine singular makes sense. Now, is this simply an imperfect? Okay, so the issue is, how do we tell an imperfect from a Jussive? So let's just do a quick review of the difference between the imperfect and the Jussive. If we have a strong root, then the letters aren't going to change at all between the two of them, but we might see a shift in the accent. Yiktol will be the imperfect, but yiktol will be the Jussive. Some roots that are weak roots can change their form, and so we'll have what we call the long form, the one that still has a mater lectionis, like yakum or yashit, whereas the short form, which has generally lost its mater, although sometimes it's just the vowel, we have yakum or yashet. Then when we have a pronominal suffix, sometimes that will indicate for us, because the imperfect will take its pronominal suffixes with a connecting N syllable, and then that noon of that N might turn into a dagesh forte in the letter that's making up the pronoun. This is the most consistent with third third person pronominal suffixes. The Jussive, however, will not use that connecting noon. So like with 3MS form, you would see ehu on the Jussive, but ennu on the imperfect. And then the one that pertains to this verse, if it's negated, we'll have lo plus the imperfect. We will have all plus the Jussive. And then furthermore, the Jussive will always occur in speech. And maybe we should refine that further and say it will be in hortatory speech. So even if the verb isn't showing us by its form or by negation that it's Jussive, maybe there's an imperative close by, or the particle na, or something that is indicating to us that we have hortatory speech. And so our prefix form there is going to be a Jussive. Coming back to our passage, we have al tira Avram, do not be afraid, Avram, or don't fear, Abram. We might stop and reflect here. How many times have you heard somebody say something like, do you know what the most common command is in the Bible? Don't be afraid. And then maybe they tell you how many times it occurs. Well, we just talked about the difference in how to recognize a Jussive and an imperfect. Is it going to matter whether it says all plus Jussive or lo plus imperfect when people are told do not fear? And what would that difference be? Well, of course it's going to matter. Do you remember what the difference between the two negated forms is? Okay, so lo plus an imperfect can just be predictions, such and such will not happen, right? We're not in hortatory speech then. Or it can be a strong command, like a lot of the 10 commandments are do not do such and such. And so that's lo plus the imperfect. And lo plus the imperfect is much more likely to be this like abiding command and a solid principle that always is going to go into effect. Do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not lie, or do not bear false witness against your neighbor, to be more precise for that context. Whereas all plus the Jussive at least can be a very situationally determined thing. So here we have al tira, don't fear Abram at this moment. That doesn't mean there's never going to be a reason for Abram to fear. And it's interesting to do a search. So on the one hand, we could search lo plus the perfect of yareh in order to see cases where people did not fear, and then look at what they didn't fear and how the text evaluates them. So, we would find of, say, a fool or a rebel or something that they did not fear the Lord. And so not fearing was a bad thing. We would find other cases where somebody trusted the Lord, and so they did not fear some danger. So that's just reporting things that happened, and then in the context, we can get some evaluation. In cases where, say, the Lord or the angel of the Lord comes to somebody and shows up, and then says, do not fear, that's all plus the Jussive, not lo plus the imperfect, because there are reasons to fear the Lord at times. And so it's just in this moment where I'm showing up and you might be afraid, I want to assure you that this is not such occasion on which to be afraid. Then we have lo plus imperfect told to people, and that is going to occur in context where we hear things like, do not fear other gods, or if you are trusting in me, then do not fear certain threats. It's not something to take for granted, like, I never need to be afraid of anything. God is always on my side, rooting for me, rah, rah, rah. Because the real issue is for us to be on God's side. And when he has given us some task or promise, and we are with him, in that circumstance, then he has assurances for us that we do not need to be afraid of certain things. This idea of do not be afraid, yes, it occurs many times in the Bible, but it's something that we need to dig a little deeper in. And so maybe that's a study that you'll want to do on your own before you teach on a verse that's like this next time. Then we have Anoki Magen Lak. So Anoki is the 1CS pronoun I. We have to supply to be. I am Magen. Maybe also a word that wasn't in our first year Hebrew vocabulary. Magen is a shield. Then we have lock, so preposition lamed and 2ms. And this is a pausal form, so it's not laka, right? Normally we're looking for ka from ta, from ata, but the 2ms suffix when it's in pause is simply ak. And then we have sakaraka harbe ma'od. So when we look at harbe, we see resh bet he as our root, and the resh has joined a prefix he, which has a patak, so that's signaling to us what stem. That would be a hifil, right? That's a hifil infinitive absolute, and it gets moved in its function to be a very general adjective. So rava, to be great, to be many. Hifil would be like to make many. And then it's like a word for very much, just as is ma'od. So when you get harbe and ma'od together, it's really stressing this idea of a whole bunch, quite a lot of. And then sakaraka would be your reward. So your reward is, or inferring, will be very great. Harbe ma'od does occur together as attributive position adjective. And so it could be that that's exactly what we have here, except in predicate position, which is much more rare. There's also a text critical note on this. So when we look at the text critical note on harbe, it says, right, L, C, a squiggle, arbe. So lega, cum, read with, and that stands for the Samaritan Pentateuch. And then we see the difference here is that we have an aleph instead of a hey at the front. So what does that mean for understanding this form? The aleph is a 1cs prefix from the imperfect paradigm. It's still going to be hifil, and so it's going to have that causative notion. I will cause your reward to be ma'od. I will make your reward very great. So if we're thinking about the meaning of these two different readings, there's really not a significant difference in the meaning, because if the MT as it stands, your reward will be very great, is a promise, then the person making the promise here, the Lord, is basically saying, I'm going to be the one who causes that to happen. So you could translate that in a more loose fashion as, I will reward you greatly. On the other hand, if the aleph is the correct reading there, then it actually says explicitly, I will reward you greatly. And there's not really any significant difference in the meaning. Abraham then responds, Vayomer Avram. Then Abram said, Adonai Elohim ma tetein li. So my Lord God, right, he uses the Lord's name, ma tetein li. What will you, tetein is from Natan, what will you give to me? So the noon of Natan was also over a silent Shavah, because that was the Cal imperfect paradigm. And so the noon assimilates as a dagesh forte into its second radical, the tav there. What will you give me? Va'anoki holek ariri. Va'anoki, and I, holek. What's the key part of parsing holek? It's no ending, nothing at the beginning. This is from halak. Normally we would see just a cholam after the first radical. Here we have a cholam vav, which is much less common, but that cholam after R1 tells us we have a cal active participle. Ariri is a word that's not very common. It means childless. And halak, you might remember, often does not refer specifically to walking as in the taking of steps. And it can be used idiomatically. When it's a participle, the participle can mean that a following thing is becoming more and more of that thing. For instance, in Jonah, when we have the storm is holek, it's going on, and so air getting stormier and stormier. Here, a word like childless, you can't get more and more childless, although I guess you can go farther and farther in time as childless. And so the idiom here is simply something like, I continue to be childless, or I keep on being childless. The emphasis is not on the I'm walking around childless. And lastly, we have uven mesek beti. And mesek is a word that means possessions, and this is also idiomatic. So ben, we learn son when we first are learning ben and bat and av and aim and all those family terms. But ben is a noun of relationship that very often, I've never done a count to give a percentage, but very often is not meaning son or son of or anything male. Right, so you can call an arrow, but you can call an arrow the son of a bow, and you can talk about sparks from a fire as the son of a fire, and students maybe as the sons of prophets, and people in a profession as the ben of, and then whatever the profession name is. And so the son of the possessions of my house is a way to refer to an heir. Right? This is going to be the person who is in line to become in charge of all my stuff. Then we have hu damesek Eliezer. So it is someone from Damascus, namely Eliezer, is how we would handle what the MT has. And you can see there's some kind of wordplay going on in saying it that way, because we have ven or ben mesek and then dam mesek. There's also a text critical note on that, and that note says pergul aram ad ben mesek, which means probably a gloss in Aramaic on Ben Mesek. So there's two perspectives here. One is that the author is making a clever play on words, and the other is that somebody added hu damesek to the text at some point, maybe in the margin, and it's worked its way into the text and it's still there. It would be an odd way to say that someone is from Damascus. There's no min on the front. If we look up say Damascus with the 3ms pronoun, this is going to be the only place that it means he's a Damaskite or Damascene or whatever you use for the gentilic of Damascus in English. On the other hand, if you're trying to stretch things in order to make a word play, maybe you're not being quite as precise in your grammar. So you have scholars taking both perspectives on that. And then we have Eliezer, the personal name. So if we translate the MT here, we have my heir is of Damascus, it's Eliezer. And so Abraham is replying back to the Lord's assurance with a question, because there's doubt. And it's one of the great things about our relationship with God that we can ask questions like this. And so the rest of the chapter is going to be on addressing the concern that he has. It's been a long time since you made that promise. I'm still childless. I don't see what you're doing. And so he's got questions, and then the Lord is going to address those questions.